Hello and welcome to our Hacking HR event. Super happy to have you, people from all over the world. It's one of the things I love about the Hacking HR community. My name is Rusty Gaylord. I am joining you from California, and I am very much looking forward to our conversation today. So a quick apology for our delay. We had some technical issues on our end getting started, but we're happy to be here. So today we are talking about empathy at work, exploring the connection between empathy, culture, and business. This is part of our October series, which is really talking about the soft skills and how soft skills are part of an essential business strategy, right? These are things like empathy, kindness, psychological safety, vulnerability, culture. Super important topic, and we're happy to be here with you today. So let's bring our panelists in. We are going to have a great conversation. And so as our panelists are joining us, I'm going to just do a little round robin here and have everybody introduce themselves, as we've got a great group of people here. So I'm going to kind of go around the way I see people on the screen, which is, we're going to go clockwise, starting with Colin, whose camera's not working yet. So maybe we'll start with Mark as Colin tries to get his camera sorted out. But Mark, if you just want to give a brief introduction of who you are, where you're coming from, and what is the first thing that comes to mind for you when you think about empathy?
Yeah, thanks, Rusty. So I'm Mark Clausen, CEO at CrewJoy, a company and a tech startup that I built that's actually serving the needs of empathy in organizations. And so, when you ask that question, what's one of the first things that I think about when we talk about empathy? It's actually just the crucial nature and the role that it plays in organizations. And that's the thing that we're going to talk about a lot today. But just how critical empathy is to actual business success is what comes to mind first for me.
Great. Thanks, Mark. Go ahead, Nicole.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole Riley, Chief People Officer, as well as CEO of Elevate Executive Consulting. When I think of empathy, the first thing that comes to mind for me is understanding, right? That basic sense of understanding somebody else. And obviously the critical nature of it, as Mark said as well. So that's at its simplest what jumps to mind for me.
Fantastic. Renuka, welcome.
Thank you. Renuka Iyer, Pharma. I work as the Senior Vice President and Chief People and Culture Officer. What comes to mind for me about empathy is what's life without it?
All right, short and sweet. Excellent. Thanks, Renuka. Welcome. Charmaine.
Hi, I'm Charmaine, the founder and CEO of Chapter 2 LLC, which is an organizational and talent development consultancy that leverages data-backed people insights to advance strategy development processes. When I think of empathy, I also think of understanding, but I also think about the ability to demonstrate that understanding.
Interesting. Yes, thank you. And Colin, we can see you. Welcome.
Yeah, I forgot that my laptop was on mute, so I was very surprised to come back to my laptop and see all of you, but I'm happy to see you all of the same. My name's Colin Mincy. My pronouns are he and him. I'm the VP of HR for the Global Fund, and I also am the co-founder of a consultancy that actually is grounded by work on empathy called Going Beyond the Work. And when I think about empathy, I think about how difficult life has been since 2020, and how pain and loss and difficulty is the great equalizer. It doesn't matter where you're born or what you're born into or what your identity is. It's something that we all experience, and so having the tools to really center how to support one another, particularly in difficult moments, I think is the key to working in healthy work environments.
Fantastic. Great. Thank you all for the introductions, and I'm so glad that you're here. I'm looking forward to our conversation today. I want to start off with a question that maybe kind of like going, rather than focusing on the benefits of empathy, but I want to start off with what are some of the challenges about bringing empathy into the work culture? I mean, we just talked about how critical it is, how it's a foundation for understanding. I like Colin, certainly bringing empathy in the context of the difficulty that we've all faced in the last couple of years with the pandemic. All of those are great things. And yet we got work to do. Like, who has time for empathy? Like, how do you fit empathy into a busy work schedule? And where does it fit in? And is it a trade-off? Is it like, either I'm doing work or I'm being empathic, but they don't overlap. So I just love to kind of start to explore and unpack a little bit some of the negative perceptions or the reasons why people might say it doesn't fit at work. And so just I'm going to open it up to whoever would like to go first. Go ahead and just take yourself off mute and respond, and we'll have an opportunity to dig in and have a great, rich conversation.
Well, I could jump in first there. Yeah, I think the thing about empathy is, a team or a leader just can't simply say, "All right, team, starting today, we're all going to be more empathetic." It's not like a light switch that we can turn off immediately. It's a component of our emotional intelligence, and there may be some inherent genetic components to emotional intelligence, but for the majority, it's a skill that can be learned and practiced. It takes time and energy. I like to think of empathy in a team as a muscle. You want that muscle to be as strong as possible. But we haven't been going to the gym, and so maybe that muscle is a little bit atrophied. And so that is one of the challenges. Is it does take some work. It takes some practice. It has to keep being exercised. We can't just assume that it's going to happen on its own, and that can scare leaders. They look at that and they say, "Oh, this is an investment that we need to make. We don't know if we have time for that." But really, one of the ways that I've seen organizations overcome that is finding all of these small ways to embed that just into the rhythms of a team and the workflows that you have. So instead of it, being, "Hey, we're going to take today and we're going to work on our empathy," and it feels like this big risk. Actually, it's like, no, it's these little moments that we build into all of the workflows and rhythms that we have, chances for team members to practice that skill, to grow in it over time, and to exercise that muscle. And so it doesn't have to be this big, scary investment if we think about it differently, as this thing that we can embed into the actual fabric of how we collaborate and work with each other.
I'd like to add to something that Mark said around it being scary, right? And I do think that you've got leaders, probably those with lower emotional IQ, that think of empathy and get scared by the fact because they want to wall off everything that happens outside of the workplace, right? And so you've got people that are having these experiences in life, whatever they may be, or bringing a context into work that you're not aware of. And we've seen it over the years that leaders want to just make sure, something happens in the world, they don't want to know about it, right? They just want you to come to work and do your job. And that's just not reality. And so I think bringing that reality into the workplace and getting lower EQ leaders to understand that can be a challenge.
Yeah. I'd want to add that, cultural differences are always going to play into whether or not someone can lean into something or not, or whether or not that was part of, who they are. And quite frankly, not everyone is wired, for empathy. And I think there has to be space for that as well, because, what I've seen is people feeling that because they're failing to demonstrate whatever it is that the organization has, said, empathy, that they are now somehow being left behind. So I definitely think there has to be space for how do organizations ensure that they're clear on what they mean by that, and recognizing and rewarding demonstrations of that, right? Because there's always going to be things like and there's also the emotional labor of it, right? It's a lot when you think about being vulnerable, other people being vulnerable with you, and what does that mean? And another challenge I believe that some organizations have is the confusion between empathetic leadership or an empathetic organization and being an empath, right? And I think people get that really confused. You can be empathetic to someone and not be an empath. And I think because being an empath might have some negative connotations, organizations have likely shied away from that. And also training and development resources. Are we going to actually put the dollars and the time behind training people on what this means and how it's demonstrated so it can be measured?
Yeah, I think, go ahead, Colin.
No, please.
I can add to what Charmaine said. This notion of misconception of what empathy means, and sometimes confusing that with sympathy could also be something that's in the way. Also, the social conditioning of what's acceptable at the workplace. People in a results-driven world. Is there space for bringing out the human side. And so I think that is another element that is a challenge that organizations don't necessarily pay attention to or make it a priority. The other thing that comes to mind is how organizations are set up. Organizations are set up to make profits. I mean, at the heart of it, it is the financials, isn't it? So, they set up for profits, set up for products and services, and then come the people. So the people element is typically the last, just the way the organization is set up. And so I think, redefining empathy and clarifying what it really means and how it can be useful to businesses, and kind of clarify the connection between empathy and financial gains in an organization. I think that conversation is so important. So I'm grateful that we're having this conversation and connecting empathy, culture, and business, because at the end of the day, I think that connection between empathy and financial results is what will really change the game.
Yeah, that's actually where I was going to go. So now I don't know what to say, but I will tell you that earlier in my career, I worked for someone who used to ask me why I cared so much about people's feelings, right? And by the way, I hope she's watching so that she can hear other people talk about how important this is. But the underpinning of the challenge, Rusty, is that not all people in positions of leadership or management should be in positions of leadership and management. And sometimes we elevate and promote people just because they've been kicking around for a while or because they're technically proficient. So I think one of the challenges is, have we centered what values and traits and attributes as an organization we want our leaders and managers to have, and connected to that, how do we develop and train folks who, as Mark indicated before, who don't have the muscle, and set expectations and measures of accountability for those who don't display it. I have to say I'm a bit exhausted about explaining what the institutional value is to DEI and the institute, but it's part of the game, as Renuka just said. And so I think it's a multitude of things. It's creating a foundation for empathy to be expected, and it's also about creating value. I think we create safer and more dynamic and more collaborative work environments. If we care about each other, we probably care about our customers, for those in the private sector. So I just don't see how businesses do well by each other without it.
Yeah, this is fantastic. This is such a rich conversation. I've heard a couple of things stood out to me in your responses. One is almost all of you talked about some of the challenges that you face to bring empathy into the workforce. But then I also really like the idea that it's a skill, and this is something you can learn. And so I heard a lot of like the what we need to do differently, and I'm curious to hear a little bit more about the how. So how do you actually put some of these things into practice as a business leader, as an HR leader? What can you do? What are the skills you can bring to bear? How can you train other people? What tools do you have? How do you actually start to take this action to bring empathy more into the workforce and start to build that connection, so that empathy is connected to culture and helping to drive business results?
I would say, one of the things that we did when I was at Human Rights Watch at the start of the pandemic is that we made it mandatory not only for managers to have check-ins, and I can't believe in 2023 this is still something we still have to preach about, but really in those check-ins, not just focusing on output and what people are doing and contributing, but really digging deep in how people are feeling and what support people need from leaders or the organization, and God forbid even having conversations about how we reprioritize work so that people have space to take care of themselves or take care of issues that they are dealing with or struggling with. The second thing is the best way to ensure that these things are weaved into our ways of working is obviously through training and learning and development, but we spend so much time focusing on bad actors that we forget that there's something really powerful about amplifying the people who are doing the good work, right? And so modeling for people examples of managers or teams that are really doing empathetic collaborative work as a way of highlighting that it's possible and different ways that it can be done, I think are two good ways and practical applications for HR teams and leaders to leverage.
Absolutely. And if I may add, training is always going to be key. But I think it always starts with everything in life has to be grounded in communication. What does it mean for this organization? What's our definition of empathy? What's our definition of when that is and is not showing up? And what's the accountability measure that's in place when it is not happening, right? Because I've certainly worked in a number of organizations, to Colin's point, where some people are just in leadership positions because they're good at doing a certain thing, but they have no business managing anyone's child, because we're all our parents' child, right? But I also think it then goes back to the training and then the modeling, because I can say everything that I want to say, but if it's not being modeled and that modeling isn't being reinforced and communicated repeatedly throughout the organization, that's going to be a problem. And then the last piece I would add is, how do you connect that, to the point made earlier about the profits, because everyone's in business for, profits. How do you connect that to the profit? So how do you demonstrate by these change behaviors, and this is what it meant to us, and this is what accountability, this is what it led to? Is that measuring retention? Is that measuring engagement? Is it measuring customer satisfaction? There has to be some type of measurement component, because we're humans. That reward bell, like we get excited about that. Go to any Dave and Buster's and people are going cuckoo for these tickets, to get a prize. So I think we have to think about that piece too. So what is the communication so it's clear and consistent and there's a shared definition and understanding? What's the training and development piece of it that then that language is woven into everything you're doing? If you have training in one area, but then you have performance management process, for example, and you're using completely different language, you're not reinforcing that. And we all learn by repetition. And then the modeling and the metrics have to be there. Right. And there are examples of organizations that have done this, right? When you think about a Zappos, they've been written about a lot of times, right? When you think about, wherever people fall on this scale, Ben and Jerry's and their leaders and what they've demonstrated, right? What that has led to. So I think the ability to also tie in examples of where it has been successful is going to be really important for people.
Yeah, I'm gonna tag on there, because communication was my answer, both in how you're developing and helping the organization learn that skill, but a very direct thing is actual communication, right? What is the voice of your executive leadership team on these items, and how do you weave empathy into that? I think with everything going on in the world right now, right, my mind keeps going back to examples of when big events have happened outside of the workplace, and you're dealing with those situations. And I can think of so many very direct ways that in a written communication or verbal communication, that empathy gets touched upon. And it's so key, because it goes back to what Charmaine was saying about modeling it. Right? If you've got a leadership team that is modeling empathy, both verbally and in written communication or internal communications, as well as an organization, probably externally, given the size of your organization and maybe the pull that they have in the industry, where you're approaching some of those things outside versus smaller organizations, which may not. That is the model, right? That is, we can train you on the skill, but we have to communicate in a way that people understand that empathy is there. And then the other thing I was going to say, so I'm just repeating everything Charmaine said, was building that language and the measurement of that and the reward of that in your HR systems. So, you want to look at what somebody's talent potential. You want to look at who's key for a management position, not just because they're technically sound. Look at year-end review, performance review. Like, these are all the things where you start to look at somebody modeling empathy in their day-to-day and reward for it in a way that also shows, how you would measure anything else. And I think so building it into the HR systems, but then also being able to communicate that and model it in communications, especially from executive leaders, I think is key to being able to push that out and really show that it's part of the culture of the organization.
Yeah, I love these answers. So I don't have much to add other than just to emphasize that what we celebrate as an organization says a lot about what we value and who we are. And so I've just a very small example. I've seen, certain organizations, they'll maybe celebrate hitting certain sales benchmarks and whatnot, which is great. We should celebrate those things. We're here to make profits as a key part of, our businesses. And I've also seen an organization that very intentionally, celebrated, in their weekly all hands meeting when, something new that was learned about one of their customers. And it was like, that was the big story to bring to this meeting was, hey, I applied this curiosity to who our customers are, and here's what we've learned about them this week. And sort of this pattern of like celebrating these new insights about somebody else outside of ourselves actually built this pattern in this organization of being much more empathetic, not just internally, but in their outward facing direction as well. And actually over time, all of these little insights and these little nuggets of things that we've learned this week about our customer, because that was building up this empathy, it actually translated to, a product roadmap that was more geared towards what those people actually needed, a service that could be provided that better met the needs of their customers, all because they celebrated, this idea of curiosity and empathy and having learned something new about the perspective of somebody outside of themselves. And so, it's just a very small example, but I just love that picture of what we celebrate, what's the big story we have to tell this week. And if it's less about, our greatest accomplishments and more about, somebody else's perspective, that was a way to really demonstrate that this organization cared about and was growing in their empathy across the board.
Yeah, I'm in the camp that empathy is innate. As human beings, it's a skill we come with. However, social conditioning has had us practice less of it, and we all know that anything we practice less of, we forget. So it's a skill that we come with, but we unlearn the skill, and then just because of social constraints. So I'm thinking about in OD, there is always there's this, how do you, when you have to teach a new skill, you have to unlearn something and then learn what's the skill and then refreeze the skill, which I think many of our panelists have talked about. Training, have talked about reward system, recognition systems to kind of reinforce and refreeze the new training. I can think of two things we can do. One, in addition to whatever has been said, one is define clearly what empathy means for an organization. And I think I'm thinking about Brené Brown's work. She talks about this in her book Power of Vulnerability, where she defines empathy as seeing the world as others see it. So it's really perspective taking. And tell me which business does not want perspective taking. Success really depends on perspective taking. It's a skill that needs to be practiced. And then the second point she makes is about suspending judgment. I think, Mark talked about being curious and suspending judgment. Those are kind of emphasizing that and being clear and articulate within the organization about that's what this culture is about. This culture is about perspective taking, finding a way to see the world as others see. This culture is about being curious, and articulating that I think will be helpful, so that when we do our performance, when we're trying to infuse this in our performance management and things like that, that's what we can ask, instead of asking, on a scale of 1 to 10, how empathetic is this leader? No, that doesn't, people don't really understand what's the meaning of empathy in that sense. So I think, really giving color to what it means within the organization and why that is important to the organization, I think will help. So that's the first one, the real definition of it. And then the second one, I've not at the current organization, but a previous one, worked with this company called Mtrain, and they have what's called a really cool tool called the workplace color spectrum. And the workplace color spectrum simply is it's got the red color conversations, orange conversations, yellow conversations, and green conversations. And green conversations are the ones that are respectful, that are inclusive, and really helping people see examples of how one particular sentence that when it is said in an organization can be read, which is illegal, and you better watch out, to orange, yellow, and green. And having that kind of specific information that's out there in training would also help. So clarifying what empathy means, what behaviors are acceptable within the organization, really defining it, and also clarifying why that is important to business results. And then the second, infusing specific instructions in training for how people can be can show their innate side, so to speak. Those would be my two additions.
Wow, thank you all for wonderful comments. It's hard to believe that we have 20 minutes left in our conversation, so we did start a little bit late. So but I do want to, at this point, just welcome those of you who have joined since we did kick off. So welcome. We're glad to have you here. Please continue the chat has been very active, which is wonderful. So put your questions, your comments, your observations in the comments. We love to have that. And I want you all to remember this is recorded. So when you hear something that was like, oh, that was super good what that person just said, you can go back and you can find the recording. So go to the Hacking HR website. There's lots of information there about this and more to come in the future. So I want to kind of dig in a little bit to maybe the example that Mark shared, and just invite you all to think about, is there a similar example where you've seen of empathy in practice and how that connects to the business results? I think it was Renuka who pointed out earlier that it's great to have empathy, but what is the connection to the dollars and cents, right? It's like, if the business is here to make profit, how do we make that connection? And Mark offered an example that started to make that, draw the line that says, hey, when you actually get curious and listen, you can develop better products. But I'm wondering if others have examples that you've seen from your past experience of where empathy has actually delivered a business benefit. Because I think that, like, putting that point on it and bringing it into focus can really help people wrap their heads around it.
Yeah, so I can start. I think there are a couple of I was expecting this question, so I'm mad at myself on why I have so many examples running through my head. But I want to just, there's a DEI element to this, an intersection to DEI and empathy and empathetic leadership that I think is really important. And so, as an HR nerd, I would say, that my initial response is really around policy and practice. How we set bereavement leave and parental leave and spaces for employees to be able to take care of themselves in times where work can't be a priority, right? And so I'll use when we were at Human Rights Watch, and we were a global organization. Still getting used to the fact that I don't work there, and we enacted dependent care policies where we allowed people to take 25% of their work schedule to focus on homeschooling and elder care and self-care, or just to take a break, recognizing that it wasn't possible for people to be 100% of the time, but also centering the fact that whether us guys want to admit it or not, the pandemic had more of an adverse impact on working women than any other group. And the interesting aspect of that, Rusty, was not the policies and the time off. The interesting part of that was we enacted those policies at a moment where the organization was going through internal crisis. And it's very hard to find a silver lining to the pandemic. But when I tell people that the work we did to support people in that moment not only was good for that, but actually wound up being a space of healing from the earlier crises, and also changed the role of manager from being taskmaster to also being a protector and a supporter and a safe place and an ear. It fundamentally changed the way that people led. So I think that there are tentacles and connections beyond empathy that are possible when we prioritize supporting and listening and taking care of each other. And I can tell you that it also fundamentally changed the way I lead and how I've led since I've left.
Yeah, it makes me think of, Colin, what you were saying makes me think of, what is the saying, like, take care of your customers will take care of you. Like, same, right? Like, people, take care of your people and they'll take care of you. And it has to be, for so long that work manager employee dynamic was completely one way, it feels like. And now with empathy and the way we're looking at culture, there can be a more symbiotic relationship between the two, right? We all know life happens, right? None of us get away without life happening. And being able to have that symbiotic relationship is, I think, exactly what is enhancing cultures and retention, improvement and retention and different things, and why, if you say, do you want to come work with me? My company's amazing. These are the things that people are saying. They're not saying, come here because we pay a ton. They're saying, come here because it's really amazing. I love being here. It feels like home. I have a manager who understands me. These are the things that people are touting about where they work. And I just think it's, it goes back, you've got to take care of you wouldn't not take care of your finances, right? Your financials as an organization, you wouldn't let those go and run amok. You shouldn't with your customer, and you certainly shouldn't with your people.
Yeah, that's great, Nicole. I think one of the things that I want to add is that when we're thinking about empathy and we're thinking about how this shows up in the workplace and managers and the relationship, yes, the pandemic has shifted so much. What the pandemic said is that it's okay to lean into that innate quality and that skill if that's what you have. And it was being recognized and praised, right? Where before it hadn't been. So, people who felt, oh, I want to do this, were now comfortable doing so, right? I don't like to say safe because I can't define what safety means for someone else, right? We have to define that for ourselves. But I think one of the things that we have to recognize is that, because it is innate for some and not innate for others, can we make space? Two things can be true, right? I'm from Barbados. I can tell you I have seen the rain and the sun happening all in the same time, and just cross the street, rain in one side, not rain in the other side, right? Two things can be true in the same space. So if someone is a 1 on the empathy scale and we're giving them all the training, can we make space for the fact that the best they may get to is a 5? And comparing them to the person who was already at an 8, who now with all the training is a 10, they're never going to measure up. So we also have to create space for the fact that what it looks like is going to have to shift and be acceptable, because we're all going to show up differently. And can an organization, can a leader make space for that and communicate that, right? My wonderful friend on this chat, thank you, Manola, sent me a book about bacon recently. I will read it, but I promise you, I will be nowhere close following the instructions than what she might be able to do, right? Because it's not going to come out the same. So can we make space for people who are at different levels, whether that's culturally, whether that's innate, because that has to be a part of it too. And that goes back to respecting and being open to and empathetic to different cultures, intersectional identities, because it's going to show up differently. I think about people who might be neurodivergent, right? For me, like we all are, there's some things that somebody may not be able to demonstrate. And when we emphasize, oh, you have to do this thing one time and it doesn't look that way, we might be isolating a population of people who don't feel that their brand of showing up. And I'm not talking about not being kind. I mean, they may truly not have that ability, and it may be a lot more work for them. So what does that measurement look like in the workplace? And are we also communicating that? One thing my aunt says to me all the time is, practice doesn't make perfect, it makes permanent. So we, even as we're practicing, these things, we have to make sure what permanency are we conveying? Is it that if you're not a level 10, you don't belong to this organization? Or is it that you've demonstrated a shift from where you started, and we're going to recognize that and celebrate that because that is your best?
Yeah, and I can add, when you think about how empathy is making an impact on organizations and what are some examples, mostly the empathy work happens at an individual level. And to be able to collate that and say, hey, now this, as a result, this business is being impacted, is not something that that is natural to businesses, right? Businesses don't say, well, the people that work here are really, they take perspective, they suspend judgment, and that's why we are a more creative company. We simply say innovation is our value, and therefore, we're innovative. That's how we say it. And so when you ask the question, give us examples of how empathy has showed up in workplaces. It's when organizations are innovative and creative and don't stop recreating themselves, right? Because the world around us is changing. So are we relevant for the times now, and will we stay relevant for the times in the future? Is how I would think about it. Because I've been thinking about, like, what are some examples I can bring to this conversation? This is so important. And every example that's popping in my head, I'm saying, no, that's a different, that's an example for DEI. Oh, that's an example for something else. We've given so many different names to other things that empathy feeds into. And therefore, it's really hard to draw that connection, which I think is also a challenge for how we can draw the connection between empathy and business results.
Yeah. I appreciate you all, and I've heard multiple of you making that connection, right? That empathy and diversity and different perspectives, and I think Charmaine's raising this very interesting point that some people may not get to a 10 on the scale. So what do you like? How do you consider that? So super interesting and powerful conversation. I think we probably have time for about one more, and then we're going to go to a wrap up. And so what I'm interested in is, we at the beginning, you all talked about some of the challenges of putting empathy in place. We've then gone on to talk about what are the benefits of it and how it can actually be a good thing. But as you think about the challenges, what strategies or what would you put in place to try to overcome the challenges to increasing empathy in the workplace?
I can kick us off. I think about it at different levels. So at the individual level first, then at the group level, and then the organizational level. At the individual level, I would start with self-reflection, right? I would start with eliciting feedback from others that work with me, not just at work, but also at home, in other, all the different roles I play in life, eliciting some feedback about myself as to how people experience me. And that can be the access to self-transformation. Without that self-transformation, I think getting to the next stage is going to be really hard because you don't know what to change. You can't see the gap. So I would say I would start with transformation internally first at the individual level for myself, and then begin to bring some of my own sharing with my team. So then I'm thinking about the group transformation, right? A smaller team. And that can begin with sharing. Here's what I found out about myself, and here's what my commitment is. And in the future, I will commit to be less judgmental. And every time you see me being judgmental, have a safe word, and someone can point that out, and you can go, did I do that again, right? So creating that space in which there is suspension of judgment, where there is opportunity for sharing stories within a group, I think would be the next level. And as we think about what that is for the organization, then begin to pay attention to the values. Most organizations have written values, paying attention to values and really principles. How do these values show up in the organization? What is acceptable? What's not? When are you crossing the line? What policies and processes do we need to create? Policies, processes, and workflows, right? What do we need to create so that we can, we can create the boundaries for what's acceptable within this organization? That would be, at the third stage, at an organizational stage, really defining what it means to work in this organization.
I don't want to add anything to that. I think I agree with everything Renuka just said, and I the only thing that I would say is that and Charmaine I think talked about this earlier, is in order for empathy to authentic empathetic leadership, because I think people know the difference, right? I think in order for that to really live and flourish, you have to have a foundation of safety at work where we are connecting meaningfully and communicating and having difficult conversations. But the thing that I worry about and the place that I get stuck sometimes in making sure that my colleagues in leadership are demonstrating empathy, so it's cascading down to the other levels in the organization, is that accountability word, right? Like if we are committing to empathy being a institutional or core value, are we serious about holding people accountable, particularly those in leadership who are modeling behaviors that are not consistent with that commitment? And that's, I think, where insert any word, empathy, grace, respect, inclusion, that's where the wheels fall off the wagon. So it's Renuka's answer plus measures of accountability for me.
And I will say ditto times 2, because all of that, right? All of that, for sure. I have nothing else to add.
Yeah, I love all these answers. And yeah, it's been said before, I'd say as a strategy to make this stick. Again, I think everyone has mentioned this, but just how key communication really is. People will invest in things when they understand the impact that it has. So, if we can actually connect the dots between why empathy is important and what that leads to, people get excited about that. And I was working with one organization. I was having a hard time convincing them why empathy was important, but they were, they had this culture that highly prized innovation. And so actually the strategy that we used was showing them how they would be much better innovators when they were empathetic people who were really deeply interested in other people's problems and understanding different perspectives. And they're entering into much more user research and user-centric design and more creative problem solving, and they're coming up with better innovative solutions, something they highly prized because of the empathy that they were growing in. And so that might not be the same for every organization, but my point is connecting those dots for people on a team. And when that light bulb moment happens, empathy is going to help us build a better product or serve our customers better. Suddenly they're so willing to spend their time and energy investing in it. So it's that communication and connecting dots for our teams.
Yeah, I would agree with what Mark said, and I definitely want to, plus 100 to what Colin said about the accountability, because that's always going to be the biggest piece. I think we've all worked at places where what was written about the values and what was good, acceptable and not, meant absolutely nothing in terms of demonstrated behaviors, right? I did a post on LinkedIn recently about this, right? You want to understand your organizational culture, just understand what the worst behavior tolerated is, right? Like that's really what it's about. So if we are really going to think about accountability, it has to be demonstrated, because if we want to establish trust, which is what's going to be needed to, for organizations to not only lean into empathetic, leadership styles, but for people to believe that that's true, we have to have a demonstrated consistency of a behavior that the organization views as positive. And that's how you establish trust, demonstrated consistency in a behavior, right? So I think that's the other piece. And specific to the how on this, it's about set communication, but part of that is setting goals and Are we setting shared goals, and are we communicating a shared vision? So a shared vision can't be that the leadership team has decided this is what empathy means. A shared vision means that you've actually engaged your workforce to understand what it means for them, what that would look like as it shows up for them, and that you're crafting a communication that truly is a shared vision. If I know that I had a part of something, then I'm more likely, as Mark said, to be engaged in it. When I ran programs before, being head of HR and all these experiences, I always would tell my team, we will not launch a project, initiative, or training unless we have people that we've gone to within the business to get their feedback. Let them look at our presentation first. Let them tear it apart. Why? Not only did I want to make sure that employees felt that what mattered to them was reflected, more importantly, I wanted to have my ambassadors, because I knew that when it launched, they would be the people, if other people were poo-pooing it because they knew they were part of it, they would defend it. And that's what we've got to get to.
I'm going to just cheat and apologize
Please.
in advance. I'm not really sure that I'm sorry, though. What Charmaine just said about stakeholder engagement and building evangelists for these things is the only way I've seen any initiative, particularly in global organizations, or fully remote organizations where people are not connected. It's the only way I've seen these things work.
Well, that's timely, perhaps, because we're at the top of the hour, and so we're going to wrap up. But I just want to do a quick round robin and just give each of you just a minute to share one recommendation or suggestion of a next step. Right? I think there were so many good concepts that were laid out here, but if you were talking to an HR leader, an organization that says, yeah, I want to advance the cause of empathy, the connection of empathy, the way we're expressing it in the culture and how it's leading to business results. There were a lot of different, just in the last 5 minutes. I mean, I took like 8 things down here, but just a chance for each of you, just to, as we're wrapping up here, to share, what you think would be a great next step for an HR leader in an organization to advance the cause of empathy. And let's, I'm going to start with Colin again, and we'll just go around the horn.
I'm going to pass because I just cheated. And
well, and he's passing, and we just lost his signal. So let's keep going. He had a great one, which is find the echoing what Charmaine said about finding the ambassadors. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, this might be stealing from you, Renuka, but I would say actually, just if there's one thing, it is start with yourself. Build your own empathy, and then we might be tempted to think that's an unempathetic response. Shouldn't we focus on others first? But no, I think when we're coming from a place of our own empathy, we're going to be so much better equipped to help others, our teams, those that we're connected with, get there as well. And so it's actually a really good investment to make.
Yeah, I would add, so maybe we give them 5 or 10 things to start with instead of one. But mine would be to drive curiosity in your organization, because that curiosity will bleed into curiosity of relationships in the organization, leaders with their people, R&D and how they're developing, what the customer is, and the curiosity around that. We heard a lot of great examples, and I think if you can, I believe people understand curiosity in a way that not everybody understands empathy. And I think if you drive that, you will open your organization up to being much more empathetic.
I think I go next. What's coming to me is adding a new question in your arsenal. So what am I saying? So typically HR people will ask questions like, how's that working for you? Or what do you think about this, right? And we use the words, what do you think? I know I do that. I use the words, what do you think about this? Whatever it is, whether it's a policy or process or someone coming to discuss their situation. I'm going to recommend that we add another question, which is, how do you feel about this? So not just what do you think about this, but how do you feel about this? Get into the practice of talking about feelings and learn how to respond when someone is talking about feelings. I think the reason sometimes we don't talk about feelings is because we're afraid. If people tell us, I'm really sad, we don't know how to respond to that. So, train yourself for what do you do when people share feelings of joy, feelings of sadness, feelings of frustration. What should be your response? So learn that and then ask the question, how do you feel about this?
Awesome.
Thank you. I mean, one of the things I say, you've got to name it to tame it, right? So in order to figure out, what your first step is, part of that has to be about understanding where you are as an organization, naming it. So how do people actually feel about you? What are people thinking? What do they see you as doing? And then the next part of that, naming it to tame it, is acknowledging, hey, we acknowledge that we haven't gotten this right, and this is something we want to work on, and we're seeking your support and helping us change this narrative, right? And demonstrate the behaviors and helping it hold us accountable. So name it, acknowledgement, and requests for support in the accountability piece. That's the strategy.
Yeah. So wonderful. This is amazing, right? Having ambassadors, doing the self-reflection, finding your own sense of empathy, driving curiosity, changing the questions you ask. How does that feel? And name it to tame it, right? Have the acknowledgement of where you are and drive accountability. Such wonderful next steps for everyone. Thank you. I'm sorry that we lost Colin, but thank you to Nicole, Mark, Renuka, and Charmaine for being here. What a wonderful conversation. Thank you, everyone else. Oh, Colin just joined us as we're wrapping up. Thank you to everyone who was here listening and participating in the chat. So great to see you. There is more coming up from Hacking HR. The October series continues underway about looking at soft skills in business. And starting next week is a virtual summit, becoming a strategic HR business partner. So check all of that stuff out at the Hacking HR website, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.